She believed her Alpha King was devoted, but an anonymous letter set in motion a series of unseen trials designed to expose his deepest loyalties. This isn't just about a challenge. It's about the hidden world of a king fighting for his mate while she remains completely unaware. Discover the shocking truth behind his silent struggle and the ultimate sacrifice he made for their unbreakable bond. The letter arrived without ceremony, as most dangerous things did. No trumpet, no seal, no name. Only a single sheet of thick vellum resting atop the morning council briefs, its presence so wrong it felt intentional. The parchment was old, not aged by neglect but preserved with care, edges smooth, corners unfrayed. The ink had soaked deep into the fibers, dark and deliberate, written in a hand that belonged to another century. King Alaric Vale stood at the long window of his solar when he noticed it. Dawn stretched pale gold across the capital, roofs glistening with frost, the river below breathing mist like a living thing. He had ruled this kingdom for 15 years, long enough to recognize patterns, threats, silences. This letter was a silence that leaned too close. He crossed the room and lifted it, fingers brushing the page with uncharacteristic hesitation. The words were spare, almost reverent. Loyalty is not proven in peace. Choose when the time comes. You are being watched. No signature. No demand. Just a quiet certainty that set something cold and alert behind his ribs. Alaric exhaled slowly. He did not summon guards. He did not call for his spymaster. Instead, he folded the letter once and slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat, where it rested against his heart like an accusation. For a moment, his reflection in the window caught him. Broad-shouldered, iron-threaded hair pulled back at his nape, eyes too tired for a man of 40 but too sharp to ever be mistaken for weak. The Alpha King, they called him. Not for savagery but for dominance of will. A man who led because others followed. Yet confusion flickered there now, brief and human. When Mira entered, she felt it immediately. She had learned his silences the way some learned music, by repetition and closeness. Mira Vale, queen in all but crown. His chosen mate in a kingdom that pretended love had no place in rule. She carried a tray of tea, steam curling upward, her dark hair loosely braided, a ribbon slipping free near her temple. She paused just inside the doorway. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. Alaric turned, schooling his expression out of habit. "Nothing." Mira raised an eyebrow, setting the tray down with deliberate care. "You say that when something is very much wrong." A corner of his mouth twitched despite himself. She crossed the room and took his hands, thumbs brushing the calloused skin of his palms. She was not small, but she fit him. Grounded, steady, her presence a quiet counterweight to his gravity. "You're elsewhere," she murmured. "Like part of you stepped away." He considered deflecting. He always did first. But the letter pressed against his chest, and something in her gaze, open, unafraid, undid him. "A message," he said finally. "Anonymous." Her fingers tightened. "A threat." "Not exactly. A warning, perhaps. Or a test." The word tasted strange. Mira searched his face. "Tests are for scholars and children. Not for kings," he agreed. And yet, she didn't press further. Instead, she leaned in, resting her forehead against his shoulder, breathing him in. "Whatever it is," she said, "you don't face it alone." Alaric closed his eyes, just for a second. Later that day, the border dispute erupted. What should have been a routine arbitration between two river provinces spiraled into accusation and blade-drawn fury. Messengers contradicted one another. Maps were wrong. Long-standing treaties were suddenly questioned, as if memory itself had fractured. Alaric listened, eyes narrowed, as counselors argued with a heat that felt staged. He noticed small things. The way Lord Caro avoided his gaze. How General Hest folded his arms too tightly. Whispers passed where none should have been. It was as if the room had become a board, and unseen hands were moving pieces. That night Alaric did not sleep. He sat alone in his study, the letter laid open on the desk beside a dozen reports. Patterns emerged the way constellations did. Only if you knew where to look. The escalation was too clean. The descent too sudden. Someone was testing pressure points, watching how he responded, and watching who he chose. In the days that followed, the kingdom seemed to lean inward. Trade delays. A treasury discrepancy. A rumor whispered just loud enough to be heard, questioning Myra's influence. Alaric shut it down swiftly publicly, but the damage lingered like smoke. Myra felt it too. She moved through the palace with her head high, kindness unaltered, but her eyes were sharper now. At night, when the world quieted, she traced the tension in his shoulders, listened as he spoke in fragments, never the whole truth, but enough to let her know the weight he carried. "Do you trust them?" she asked one evening, meaning his council, his inner circle, the men who had sworn fealty on blood and breath. Alaric stared at the fire. "I used to." She nodded, absorbing that without flinching. "And now? Now I trust you," he said. "And my own judgment. Nothing else is certain." She reached for his hand. "Then that will have to be enough." Outside, unseen by both of them, a figure in dark will sealed another letter. Identical ink, identical script. The game had begun. And loyalty, like love, would not be proven gently. The morning bells rang an hour late, and no one could explain why. Alaric noticed immediately. He always did. Routine was the kingdom's heartbeat, and when it faltered, something was wrong. He stood on the balcony overlooking the eastern court as servants hurried to correct the delay, their movements too quick, their eyes avoiding his. Below, merchants waited with practiced patience, soldiers adjusted ranks, and the city continued on. Yet the rhythm was off, like a familiar song played in the wrong key. Myra joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You heard it too," she said. "Yes. Everyone did." He glanced at her. And yet no one asked why. She followed his gaze, watching the court below. "Fear makes people quiet." "So does guilt," Alaric replied. They said no more. Words had become dangerous things. Too easily overheard, too easily twisted. Still, Myra's presence grounded him. She did not command space the way he did, but she held it, gently and without apology. When she spoke to the servants, they listened. When she smiled, shoulders eased. It unsettled some of the council. Alaric had noticed that too. By midday, the border situation worsened. A rider arrived from the northern pass. Horse lathered, voice strained. A skirmish had broken out, not between rival kingdoms, but between Alaric's own border wardens and a neutral trading clan that had passed freely for decades. The wardens claimed provocation. The traders claimed betrayal. Alaric listened in silence as the accounts unraveled into contradiction. "Who issued the stand-fast order?" he asked calmly. No one answered. He turned to General Hest. "You oversee the northern line." Hest's jaw tightened. "I do. No such order came from me." "And yet it was given," Alaric said. "In my name." A ripple moved through the council chamber. Unease, sharp and unmistakable. Someone was using his authority like a blade, testing its edge, seeing how deeply it would cut before he noticed. "Contain the situation," Alaric ordered. "No retaliation. No escalation. I will speak with the traders myself." Lord Caro frowned. "With respect, Majesty, that may appear as weakness." Alaric's gaze fixed on him, steady and unblinking. "Only to those who mistake restraint for fear." Caro dipped his head, but something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation, perhaps. Or disappointment. That evening, Alaric walked the outer walls alone. He did this often, though fewer knew it now. Once, in his earlier reign, he had walked among the people freely. Time had taught him caution. Still, the stones remembered his footsteps. The guards saluted, surprised but silent. From the parapet, he could see the road leading north, torchlight dotting the darkness like fallen stars. Somewhere along that road, men had drawn steel believing they served him. He pressed his palms against the cold stone and breathed. Patterns. He needed patterns. The letter had spoken of choice. The incidents forced him into them. Mercy or force, trust or suspicion, public unity or private fracture. Each decision was watched, measured, weighed. Behind him, footsteps approached. "Majesty," said a familiar voice. Captain Rowan, one of his most loyal, sharp-eyed, quick-witted, younger than most but proven in fire. "You should not be alone." Alaric did not turn. Neither should a king be surrounded by lies. Rowan hesitated. "There are murmurs among the ranks. About me. About your judgment," Rowan admitted. "About her influence." Alaric's fingers curled against the stone. "And what do you think?" Rowan met his gaze squarely. "I think whoever is spreading those rumors wants you divided. From your council. From your mate. From yourself." A faint, humorless smile touched Alaric's mouth. "Then you are wiser than most." Rowan lowered his voice. "If you'll allow it, Majesty, I'd like to investigate quietly. See who benefits from the confusion." Alaric considered. Trust was a currency being deliberately devalued. He could not afford to spend it recklessly. "Yes," he said at last. "But carefully. No accusations. No names spoken aloud." Rowan nodded once and withdrew. Later, in the privacy of their chambers, Mira tended a small cut on Alaric's hand. Stone had bitten skin without his noticing. Her touch was gentle, precise. "You're pulling inward," she said quietly. He watched her fingers, the familiar intimacy of shared space easing something tight in his chest. "Someone is testing me. I know. I don't yet know who." She tied the bandage, then looked up at him. "Do you think it's someone close?" "Yes." The words settled heavily between them. Mira did not recoil. She rarely did. Instead, she sat beside him, knees touching. "Then remember this," she said. "Tests reveal the tester as much as the tested." He studied her face. Strong lines softened by warmth, eyes that missed little. "Are you afraid of losing you?" she asked. "Always. Of this game." "No. Because you don't stop being who you are just because someone is watching." He reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. "And if they force a choice, then choose honestly," she said. "That's the only victory that lasts." Outside, unseen and patient, the shadow moved again, subtle as ink drying on parchment, waiting for the next decision to bleed. The peace summit was meant to be ceremonial. Banners lined the Hall of Accord, silk-heavy with stitched histories. Treaties honored, wars ended, promises sealed by handshakes and wine. Sunlight poured through high-arched windows, catching dust motes that drifted like slow, harmless stars. To the gathered nobles and envoys, it was a familiar stage. To Alaric, it felt like a trap dressed in civility. He stood at the head of the long table, posture relaxed, expression composed. Inside, his mind worked relentlessly. Every greeting was weighed, every pause measured. Mira entered moments later, and the room subtly changed. She wore deep blue, the color of river shadows at dusk. No crown, no official title, yet her presence carried quiet authority. Conversations softened as she passed. Some smiled warmly. Others stiffened, eyes flicking away too quickly. Alaric noticed everything. "Alpha King," boomed Lord Seric of the Eastern March, rising with exaggerated cheer. An honor, as always. The honor is mutual, Alaric replied smoothly, though he had never trusted Sarek's enthusiasm. Men who performed loyalty too loudly often had something to hide. They took their seats. Wine was poured. Words flowed. For the first hour, it was exactly as expected. Border clarifications, trade adjustments, ritual affirmations of mutual respect. Alaric played his part perfectly, offering compromise without concession, strength without threat. He felt the watching then, sharper than before. Not from one direction but many. Then Sarek leaned forward. "There is one additional matter," he said, tone casual, fingers steepled. "An opportunity, really." Alaric inclined his head. "Go on." "Our territories," Sarek continued, "would benefit from a deeper alliance. Shared patrols. Joint authority in contested regions. A consolidation of leadership." Several heads nodded. Others remained carefully neutral. "And the cost?" Alaric asked. Sarek smiled. "Only clarity. Such an alliance would require decisions made without undue influence. For the sake of efficiency." The room went quiet. Mira felt it before it landed fully. The subtle shift, the unspoken exclusion. She did not look at Alaric. She did not need to. Her spine remained straight, her expression calm, but something tightened low in her chest. Alaric's voice was steady. "Define undue influence." Sarek spread his hands. "Personal attachments. Advisors without official standing. Sentiment. Test then. Blunt in its politeness." Alaric leaned back in his chair. "You are asking me," he said slowly, "to accept an alliance that requires me to diminish the voice of the person who knows me best." Sarek's smile thinned. "I am asking you to prove that your rule is impartial." A murmur rippled through the hall. Alaric felt the weight of the crown, symbolic, yes, but heavy all the same. He could accept. It would stabilize the borders. Silence dissent. Please those already whispering. It would also fracture something essential. He looked at Mira then. Not for permission. For truth. She met his gaze without fear. Without demand. Whatever he chose, she would bear it with him. That knowledge steadied him more than any strategy. "There will be no alliance built on erasure," Alaric said quietly. Sarek's eyes hardened. "Then you refuse." "I redefine," Alaric replied. "Any agreement we make will recognize all voices that strengthen this kingdom. Mine included." Silence followed, thick, uncertain. At last, Sarek inclined his head. "Very well. Let us adjourn." The summit ended without bloodshed, but tension clung to the air like smoke. That night, the rebellion was announced. Not openly, not dramatically. Just a report. Several outlying commanders refusing orders, citing confusion over authority. Supplies misdirected. Suddenly questioned. Nothing that could not be explained away. Everything that could destabilize. Alaric read the reports alone, fingers tapping once against the desk. This was no coincidence. The summit had been a blade. This was the twist. He summoned Rowan and General Hest. "This is manufactured," Alaric said. "Too coordinated. Too clean." Hest shifted uneasily. "If we move too harshly, we validate the lie," Alaric finished. "Yes." Rowan spoke carefully. "If we do nothing, it spreads." Alaric nodded. "Which means we do something deliberate." They looked at him, waiting. "I will not purge my own ranks based on whispers," he said. "We address the grievances publicly, transparently. Anyone acting in good faith will have space to speak. Anyone manipulating will expose themselves by impatience." Rowan's eyes flickered with admiration. Hest's with concern. After they left, Mira found him standing by the window again, city lights glowing below. "You chose the harder path," she said softly. He turned to her. I chose the honest one. She stepped closer. That's what frightens them. He studied her face. The calm strength, the unspoken worry she carried so he did not have to hold it alone. If this test was meant to break us. It won't, she said, certain. Outside, somewhere beyond the walls, the unseen orchestrator adjusted their plans. The king had not bent, so the pressure would increase. The first blow landed quietly, the way real damage often did. Came disguised as numbers. Alaric discovered it before dawn, poring over treasury ledgers while the palace slept. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss. Tax flows steady, grain reserves accounted for, trade tariffs balanced. But the longer he stared, the more the pattern emerged, subtle as wrought beneath polished wood. Small diversions, perfectly legal reallocations. Funds shifted just enough to weaken supply routes without triggering alarm. Someone knew the system intimately. He closed his eyes, breathing through the slow burn of anger that threatened his composure. This was not a foreign hand. This was not ignorance. This was betrayal executed with precision and patience. When he summoned the council later that morning, the room felt different. Chairs scraped too loudly. Papers rustled too often. Eyes met and slid away. Alaric did not accuse. Not yet. Instead he watched. Lord Caro spoke at length about the need for stricter oversight. Lady Fenra proposed emergency levies, to reassure the people. Each suggestion carried the faint scent of opportunism, as though they were testing which direction the wind would blow. Only Elias Thorne remained silent. Elias had been with Alaric since before the crown. Friend, strategist, confidant. A man whose loyalty had never once been questioned. Alaric felt the absence of his voice like a missing note in a familiar chord. Elias, Alaric said gently. You've said nothing. Elias looked up, startled. Only that we should proceed carefully, Majesty. Carefully. The word lodged uncomfortably in Alaric's chest. After the council dispersed, Alaric asked Elias to stay. The chamber emptied, echoes lingering like ghosts. Sunlight slanted through the windows, illuminating dust in the air between them. For a long moment neither spoke. Something troubles you, Alaric said at last. Elias hesitated, then sighed. This unrest. It's changing you. Alaric studied him. How? You question everyone. Even those who've bled for you. Elias's voice was calm, but beneath it lay something strained. A king cannot rule in suspicion. No, Alaric agreed. But he cannot rule blind either. Elias's jaw tightened. Be careful, Alaric. You risk alienating the very people who keep this kingdom standing. The words struck deeper than they should have. When Elias left, Alaric remained where he was, staring at the closed door, heart heavy with doubt. If Elias had chosen this moment to push back, what did that mean? By nightfall the sabotage worsened. A shipment of winter grain vanished between the river docks and the southern storehouses. Guards swore the seals were intact when they passed it along. Merchants claimed innocence. The city began to murmur. Nothing loud, nothing actionable, just enough to unsettle. Mira heard it when she walked the lower halls. A servant paused mid-bow, eyes flicking toward her belly, then away. Another murmured apologies too quickly. Fear, she realized, was bleeding into superstition. When uncertainty rose, people looked for something, someone to blame. She found Alaric alone in the map room, shoulders rigid, one hand braced against the table. You're carrying this by yourself again, she said softly. He didn't turn. Someone is draining the kingdom from the inside. And I don't know who. She stepped closer, resting her palm between his shoulders. Then stopped trying to solve it alone. He laughed quietly without humor. That's the cruel genius of this test. The more I share, the more vulnerable we become. Myra's hand slid to his arm, grounding. Or the stronger. If you trust wisely. He covered her hand with his own. What if the betrayal is closer than I think? Then we face it together, she said, voice steady. But don't let suspicion hollow you out. That's what they want. Later that night, Rowan returned with troubling news. I followed the money, he said, voice low. The diversions trace back to authorizations signed by Elias. The room went very still. Alaric felt as though the air had been pulled from his lungs. You're certain? Rowan nodded grimly. The signatures are his. The routes match his old contingency plans. Alaric closed his eyes. Memory surged. Shared strategies, late nights, victories hard won. Elias, who had once sworn to die before betraying him. Leave us, Alaric said quietly. When Rowan was gone, Mira spoke first. It may not be what it looks like. I know, Alaric replied. And that's what terrifies me. If Elias was compromised, then this was no longer a test of policy. It was a test of the heart. He dismissed the guards from his chambers that night and sat alone, staring at the letter once more. The words seemed to watch him now, smug in their patience. Choose when the time comes. The time was coming faster than he had hoped. And somewhere in the palace, unseen and unchallenged, the architect of the test smiled. By the fifth night, sleep had become a stranger. Alaric lay awake beside Mira, listening to the measured rhythm of her breathing, the soft rise and fall of her chest, a fragile island of calm in a sea of unrest. Moonlight traced pale lines across the ceiling, and shadows gathered in the corners of the chamber like unspoken thoughts. He had ruled through war, famine, and revolt, but this was different. This was intimate, surgical, designed to erode, not overthrow. He rose before dawn and dressed without sound. The palace corridors were hushed, stone cold beneath his boots. Torches flickered low, their flames bending as if whispering secrets to the walls. Alaric moved with purpose now, not chasing fragments but gathering them. The test had progressed far enough. The pattern was almost whole. The letter, the border provocation, the summit's poisoned offer, the financial bleed. Elias, too precise to be chaos, too restrained to be revolution. Someone wanted proof, not of power but of devotion. He summoned Rowan, General Hest, and Lady Fenra to the war chamber just after sunrise. No council, no observers. I will speak plainly, Alaric said once the doors were sealed. This kingdom is being tested, not invaded, not betrayed for gain, but examined. Fenra frowned. Examined by whom? That, Alaric replied, is what we will confirm today. He laid out the evidence, not accusing, not sparing detail. He watched their faces as he spoke, who flinched, who leaned in, who guarded themselves too carefully. When he finished, silence settled heavily. It can't be Elias, Hest said at last. He's loyal to the bone. Loyal, Alaric agreed. But loyalty can be weaponized. Rowan shifted. You think he's being used? I think, Alaric said slowly, that he believes this is necessary. Fenra inhaled sharply. Necessary for what? For me, Alaric said. For my reign. For her. He dismissed them with orders to observe, not intervene. Then he went to Elias. Elias was in his chambers packing. That alone confirmed half of what Alaric feared. You're leaving, Alaric said quietly from the doorway. Elias turned, relief and sorrow crossing his face in equal measure. I hoped you wouldn't come alone. Alaric stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Tell me why. Elias's shoulders sagged. Because I needed to know if you would choose her. The words landed softly, devastatingly. Choose her over what? Alaric asked. Over the kingdom, Elias said. Over perception. Over tradition. He met Alaric's gaze, eyes bright with unshed tears. I've seen kings undone by love. I needed to be certain you wouldn't be. So you orchestrated chaos. Alaric's voice remained steady, though something in him fractured. You destabilized our borders. You bled our treasury. You let people doubt her safety. I never meant for it to go that far, Elias said quickly. But once it began, I couldn't stop it without revealing myself. And I needed the test to be complete. Alaric was silent for a long moment. You underestimated me, he said finally. And you underestimated her. Elias bowed his head. I wanted to believe you were worthy of both crown and love. Alaric's jaw tightened. That was never yours to decide. Elias left the palace before noon, exile chosen over execution, a mercy Alaric extended not out of weakness but history. By evening the truth had crystallized. Alaric addressed the kingdom from the high steps as the sun dipped low, casting fire across the stone. He spoke of trials without naming their architect, of loyalty tested and found unbroken, of unity forged under pressure. Then he did what no one expected. He called Mira forward. Hush fell. This woman, Alaric said, voice carrying across the square, is not my weakness. She is my witness, my counsel, my equal. He took her hand. Any future built without her is not one I will rule. The crowd stirred, then knelt. Later, in the quiet of their chambers, Mira touched his face gently. You chose. I always would have, he said. She rested her forehead against his. Then the test failed. Or perhaps at last it had succeeded. Outside, the city breathed again, unaware that its future had been decided not by conquest, but by love held fast under fire. The kingdom settled into an uneasy quiet, the kind that followed storms rather than preceded peace. Alaric felt it everywhere. In the cautious politeness of the court, in the way guards stood a fraction straighter when he passed, in the silence that fell whenever Mira entered a room. The truth had not been fully spoken, but it had been felt. People sensed that something fundamental had shifted, that the Alpha King had crossed an invisible threshold and returned changed. Yet the matter was not finished. Tests, Alaric had learned, rarely ended the moment they were understood. They demanded reckoning. 3 nights after Elias's exile, Alaric received a message. No parchment this time, no archaic script. Just a spoken request delivered by a page whose hands shook as he bowed. She waits in the old archive, the boy said. She said, you would know. Alaric did. The old archive lay beneath the palace, carved deep into stone, a place of forgotten treaties and sealed histories. He had not descended its steps in years. He went alone. The air below was cool and dry, heavy with dust and memory. Lamps burned low, casting long shadows across shelves of leather-bound volumes. At the center of the chamber stood a woman wrapped in dark gray wool, her hood lowered. She turned as he approached. Lysandra, Alaric said softly. She inclined her head. My king. Once she had been his mentor, older, sharper, the one who taught him how to read people instead of texts, how to hear the meaning behind words. She had left court years ago, citing fatigue. He had believed her. You orchestrated this, he said. Not a question. Yes. Why? His voice did not rise. Anger would have been easier. Lysandra's gaze was steady. Because I have watched kingdoms fall to sentiment. Because I have watched love hollow out rulers until there was nothing left but longing. He paused. And because I loved this kingdom enough to risk your hatred. You endangered lives, Alaric said. You broke trust. I tested it, she corrected. And you passed. Something cold settled in his chest. That was never your right. No, she admitted. But it was my burden. They stood in silence, the weight of years pressing close. You could have come to me, Alaric said. Spoken your doubts. And if you had failed? Lysandra asked. If you had chosen stability over her? If you had agreed to Saric's terms? Alaric's eyes hardened. Then you would have revealed yourself as a traitor. A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed her face. What happens now? She asked. Alaric considered. The law demanded punishment. His heart demanded restraint. His crown demanded balance. You will leave this city, he said. Tonight. Your name will not be spoken publicly. But you will never again influence this kingdom from shadow or light. Lysandra bowed deeply. You have become more than I hoped. Alaric did not reply. Some truths did not deserve comfort. When he returned to the surface, dawn was breaking. Mira waited for him in the garden, dew clinging to the roses, her expression searching his face. It's done, he said. She exhaled slowly. And you? He drew her into his arms, resting his forehead against hers. Still standing. She smiled faintly. Good. Because what comes next will not be easy either. He laughed softly, a sound edged with weariness and relief. Nothing worth ruling ever is. Above them, the sun rose fully, casting light over a kingdom reshaped not by force, but by a man who had been willing to be seen, tested, and unbroken. And though the trial had ended, its echo would shape everything that followed. Power, Alaric had learned, was most dangerous when it was quiet. In the days following Lysandra's departure, the kingdom watched him closely, not with fear but with expectation. Whispers curled through corridors and marketplaces alike, speculation dressed as concern. The Alpha King had faced an unseen trial and emerged unchanged in posture, yet unmistakably altered in presence. There was a steadiness to him now, a deeper gravity, as though his choices no longer hovered between paths but had rooted themselves firmly into the stone beneath his feet. He let the silence stretch. Then, on the 7th day, he summoned the court. The great hall filled slowly, tension threading the air. Nobles stood in careful clusters. Military leaders lined the pillars. Advisors whispered behind hands. Mira entered beside Alaric, not a step behind him, not a step ahead. She wore no regalia beyond a simple circlet, silver unadorned. Her strength was not ornamental. Alaric waited until the doors closed. You have felt uncertainty, he began, voice carrying without effort. That was no accident. A murmur rippled, quickly stilled. There were forces at work within this kingdom, he continued, that believed my loyalty, to my people, to my values, to the woman beside me, required verification. Mira felt his hand brush hers, grounding, deliberate. I will not name them, Alaric said. Not because they deserve mercy, but because this kingdom deserves stability. What matters is not who tested me, but what was proven. He turned slowly, letting his gaze meet theirs one by one. No alliance will stand if it requires erasure. No peace will last if it demands I fracture myself to maintain it. My authority does not weaken when I choose integrity. It solidifies. He paused, then added quietly, anyone who believes otherwise is free to leave. No one moved. Alaric nodded once. Good. He announced reforms then. Not reactionary but precise. Financial oversight redistributed, removing concentrated control. Border command structures clarified, no longer vulnerable to false orders. Channels of counsel widened, transparency favored over secrecy. Each change closed a door that had once allowed shadow to slip through. The court listened, rapt. When he finished, Mira stepped forward. Not summoned but welcomed. This kingdom, Alaric said, will know her as it knows me. Not as weakness. as witness. A breathless moment passed. Then one by one they knelt. Later, as the hall emptied and the weight of ceremony gave way to exhaustion, Mira touched his arm. You exposed them without ever naming them. They exposed themselves, he replied. I simply removed the dark they needed to hide in. She studied him. You've changed. Yes, he said. But not away from myself. That night, they walked the ramparts together. City lights glowing below like constellations fallen to earth. The air was crisp, clean with the promise of winter. Do you regret it? Mira asked quietly. Any of it? Alaric stopped, turning to her fully. I regret that someone thought love made me unfit to rule. His thumb brushed her knuckles. But I do not regret proving them wrong. She smiled, soft and fierce all at once. Then neither do I. Above them, the kingdom slept, stronger for having seen its king stand not alone, but anchored. The nights that followed were quieter, but quieter did not mean peaceful. The court resumed its routines, the city its rhythms, yet Alaric carried the memory of the unseen manipulations like a shadow pressed to his back. He did not speak of them except to Mira, whose presence had become both shield and confidant. In the privacy of their chambers, he finally allowed himself to unfold what had remained tightly bound. Every moment of hesitation, every calculated choice, every fear he had buried beneath the armor of authority. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded neatly in her lap. Tell me everything, she said, voice steady, patient, unjudging. Alaric inhaled slowly. It began with a letter, he murmured, picking up the parchment from the desk. He smoothed its edges absently, as though handling it gently could erase its sting. The words were sparse, almost reverent, but they demanded attention. Loyalty is not proven in peace. Choose when the time comes. You are being watched. Mira leaned forward slightly, eyes wide but trusting. And you didn't know who. No, he admitted. But I felt it. The moment the letter arrived, I sensed that the next weeks would demand everything. Not just of me, but of the kingdom and of us. His gaze lifted to hers. Every incident after that, the border, the summit, the treasury, I analyzed it, seeking a pattern, a hand behind it all. And slowly, the pattern became clear. She listened in silence, absorbing not just his words but the weight behind them. I feared, Mira, he continued, voice low, almost breaking, that I would have to choose between ruling well and protecting what I value most. That I would have to sacrifice you in some way to maintain order. He paused, letting the confession hang between them like a fragile glass ornament. I feared that loyalty could be tested against love, and that I would fail. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining. You didn't fail, she whispered. You never did. Alaric studied her face, tracing the calm certainty she exuded. And yet the fear was real. Every choice I made, every restraint I exercised, it was to ensure that I did not betray you, that I did not betray us. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder. I understand now, she said softly. I see how heavy it was for you. How lonely. He exhaled, tension slipping just enough to allow a tremor of relief. Alone, yes, but never without you. You gave me strength, even when I couldn't speak of the danger. You reminded me of what matters. For a long moment, they remained so, shoulder to shoulder, hands entwined, sharing a silence dense with understanding. The weight of the past weeks, the trials, the betrayals, and the delicate navigation of loyalty, all of it was acknowledged, mourned, and accepted. You carried more than a crown, Mira said. You carried the weight of trust and love, and you did not falter. That is the measure of your strength. Alaric's thumb brushed the back of her hand, slow and deliberate. And you, he asked quietly, did you ever falter? She shook her head. Never. I trusted you to be yourself, to choose what was right, not what was safe. And you did. The room seemed to exhale with them, the oppressive air of intrigue and suspicion replaced by something gentler, though no less profound, a recognition of shared endurance. Their bond, forged in the crucible of unseen trials, had strengthened. Vulnerability had become a bridge, not a fracture. I want you to remember this, Alaric said, voice almost a whisper. Whatever comes next, whatever shadows arise, we have faced the unseen together. Nothing can undo that. She nodded, eyes shining with emotion, and pressed her lips briefly to his hand. We are unbroken, she said. And we always will be. For the first time in weeks, Alaric allowed himself to feel the full depth of relief, mingled with awe. The loyalty of his people had been tested. His own loyalty had been questioned. And in the midst of it all, the bond he shared with Mira had not only endured, it had grown, tempered by fire and fortified by trust. Outside, the city slept beneath a pale winter moon, oblivious to the intimate truths revealed in a quiet chamber. But within the walls of the palace, in the warmth of their shared understanding, a foundation had been laid, a foundation that would endure, no matter the trials the world would next send. And as Alaric finally leaned back against the pillows, Mira beside him, he knew that the unseen, the tested, and the betrayed had brought them closer than ever. Their love, their devotion, their trust, they had emerged from the storm unscathed, ready to face the kingdom together. The palace courtyard was bathed in early morning light, soft as silk, the kind that made every shadow seem fleeting and every stone shimmer with warmth. Alaric and Mira stood at the center, hand in hand, the weight of their recent trials already etched into their posture, their expressions calm yet resolute. Today they would reaffirm what had been tested in secret, what had been proven in fire, their bond, unshaken, unbroken. The gathered assembly was substantial but respectful. Counselors, nobles, and trusted military leaders, each standing at a measured distance. No pageantry, no perfunctory ceremony. Alaric had decreed that this vow would be symbolic of truth and unity, not performance. He looked to Mira, and she returned his gaze. There was no need for words. The shared history of weeks spent under strain, the quiet nights of whispered fears and confidences, had already spoken volumes. Let this vow, Alaric began, voice low yet carrying clearly across the courtyard, serve as a reminder that leadership without trust is hollow, that authority without loyalty is fragile, and that love, true love, demands courage and constancy. Mira squeezed his hand. And that we are not only partners in heart, she said, voice steady and melodic, but in life, in duty, and in every challenge that comes before us. Alaric drew a slow, deliberate breath. I vow, he said, to rule with integrity, guided by wisdom and strengthened by devotion. I vow to place no one above the kingdom, but to let the kingdom serve justice, prosperity, and protection for all. He paused, letting the words settle, then looked at Mira directly. And I vow to you in the sight of all here, that your voice, your counsel, and your heart will always be honored as integral to our shared path. You are my equal in all that matters, and my devotion to you is absolute. Mira's eyes glistened, sunlight catching tears she did not hasten to hide. And I vow, she said softly, to stand by you, to offer guidance and support, to hold you accountable when necessary, and to share in every burden, every triumph, and every decision that shapes our lives together. Your loyalty will always find me ready to meet it. For a heartbeat, the courtyard seemed suspended, time itself holding its breath. Then the people, the kingdom's representatives, witnesses, and allies, bowed in acknowledgement, not out of duty, but in recognition of the profound truth they had seen. Alaric released her hand gently, stepping back to allow the ceremony to conclude with quiet dignity. No one applauded. There was no cheering. The vow itself, spoken and witnessed, carried all the weight that noise could not convey. Later, as the assembly dispersed, Mira and Alaric lingered by the fountain, its waters catching the morning light in fractured prisms. "The tests," she said quietly. "The betrayals, the shadows, they were unbearable at times. But we survived them." He took her hand, lifting it to his lips. "More than survived. We have emerged stronger, wiser, and closer than ever. Our rule, our love. It will endure because it has been forged in truth, not convenience." A soft wind swept the courtyard, ruffling their hair and carrying the faint scent of winter roses. Mira leaned against his shoulder. "And the story of this trial?" Alaric smiled, a slow, contented curve. "It will become legend, yes. But not because of fear or intrigue. Because it proves that even a king must test himself, even when no one else sees." Their hands remained entwined as they walked slowly through the palace gardens, sunlight warming their path. Every step was a quiet affirmation of the vow they had spoken, of the bond no test, no betrayal, and no shadow could break. The kingdom, resilient in its own rhythm, would remember this day not for pageantry, but for the unyielding truth that had been declared. A bond tested, a love proven, and a partnership unshakable in both heart and duty. Above the city, the winter sun climbed higher, gilding rooftops and towers, reflecting off stone and water alike. And in its light, Alaric and Mira walked side by side, an alpha king and his mate, unbroken, unshakable, and ready for whatever future awaited. Years would pass, and the story of that winter, the unseen trials, the subtle betrayals, the careful tests of loyalty, would become legend. Not a tale of fear, nor a cautionary tale of power misused, but a testament to endurance, devotion, and leadership tempered by love. Alaric and Mira walked the corridors of the palace one autumn morning, their steps slow but purposeful. The kingdom had thrived under their joint guidance, walls repaired, trade routes secured, and a council strengthened by experience rather than blind obedience. The lessons of the past were embedded into every decision, every reform, every policy. In the courtyard, children played beneath the fountains, their laughter ringing through the crisp air. Soldiers trained under the watchful eyes of commanders who had once questioned, now steadfast and loyal. Merchants moved freely, assured that justice and order would protect their trade. And everywhere, the people carried a quiet respect for a king who had proven that true authority did not require fear. It required unwavering honesty, compassion, and the courage to stand by those he loved. Mira walked beside Alaric, her hand resting on his arm. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked softly, voice carrying just enough to be heard over the distant clatter of the city. "The trials, the betrayals." He smiled faintly, eyes distant for a moment. "Every day. But not with regret. Only with understanding. Every test, every shadow, every choice, they shaped us. They forged the foundation we walk on now." She squeezed his arm, leaning in slightly. "And our bond? Do you feel it has changed?" Alaric turned to her, eyes meeting hers with quiet certainty. "It has deepened. Not just by love, but by the shared knowledge of what we endured. We are not merely partners in title or in governance. We are partners in truth, and nothing can undo that." Together they approached the great hall, where banners commemorated victories both in battle and in diplomacy. Yet the largest and most permanent victory remained unseen to many. The unshakable trust between them, built in the crucible of trials meant to fracture both heart and kingdom. Later, Alaric addressed a gathering of future leaders, young nobles and commanders who would one day bear the mantle of governance. His voice carried across the hall, steady and commanding, yet threaded with warmth. "Leadership," he said, "is not measured in wealth, conquest, or fear. It is measured in the fidelity of your choices, the courage of your convictions, and the care with which you treat those who stand beside you. The true strength of a kingdom is not in its walls or armies, but in the hearts of those who guide it with honor." Mira stood beside him, silent but radiant, a living testament to the power of shared commitment. Their eyes met, and in that glance was the memory of all they had survived. The anonymous letter, the border provocations, the summit's temptations, the betrayals, and the unspoken fears. All had been overcome, not with dominion but with devotion. Years later, storytellers would whisper of the Alpha King who ruled with both mind and heart, and the Queen who never wavered beside him. They would speak of the unseen tests that revealed true loyalty and of the love that remained unbroken, guiding decisions and shaping destiny. And in the quiet chambers of the palace, Alaric and Mira would walk hand in hand, often alone, sometimes speaking, sometimes simply breathing in the comfort of shared presence. They had learned that the greatest trials were not fought in battlefields, but in the quiet vigilance of trust and devotion. And having endured them, they had forged a legacy not of fear, but of unwavering integrity and enduring love. The kingdom thrived. The council was vigilant but loyal. The people prospered. And the story of that unseen loyalty challenge became legend, a reminder that even kings must prove their worth, that loyalty and love must be tested, and that the bond between true partners is the strongest shield of all. Alaric and Mira looked over their city from the palace balcony, sunlight spilling over stone and river alike. Side by side they had survived the trials, and side by side they would continue, bound not by crown alone, but by the enduring strength of heart, trust, and unbreakable devotion. The Alpha King's legacy was not just in law or battle, but in the timeless truth that leadership guided by love, integrity, and unwavering partnership would endure far beyond any shadow, any betrayal, and any trial that fate might send. And so their story, forged in shadow and fire, became eternal.